Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be looking at the Ynnari once again and talking about how effective they can truly be when played correctly. So, as some of you might know, the Ynnari are a very powerful faction competitively. Unfortunately, not a lot of players actually do play the Ynnari at the top level. And therefore, we really don't get to see many examples of the Ynnari in competitive play. So in this video, I wanted to kind of go through the different Ynnari builds that competitive players play with. Well, the one player, I should say, one or two players that have been successful with them at tournaments. We're going to briefly talk about their playstyle and, kind of what the army composition is and so forth. And also for all you guys out there who are aspiring Ynnari players, I am going to kind of go through how the Ynnari probably should play, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are in this video, and so forth. So before we jump right into it, just a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at in today's video. We're going to be going over the requirements, benefits, and restrictions when playing Ynnari. We're going to be talking about Ynnari in competitive play and the challenge playing them presents. We're going to be looking at the strongest Drukhari units to run in a Ynnari army, which is, I believe, the most important part to understanding how they function as a force. We're also going to be going into the two best ways of running a Ynnari army and how to play them on the battlefield. And lastly, I'm going to give you guys an example Ynnari list of my own that I have been theory crafting since the recent point changes. So diving right into the requirements, benefits, and restrictions of the army itself, your Yvraine, first and foremost, needs to be your warlord, which does lock you out of the Autarch Wayleaper as a warlord. So that means no extra CP generation, unfortunately. However, your army at this point can include non-homunculus Coven Drukhari units up to half the game's point limit. So if you're playing a 2,000 point game, 1,000 of those points can be Dark Eldar. Also, you cannot include Phoenix Lords, the Avatar of Cain, or the Solitaire within your army, which I think, the Avatar of Cain maybe makes sense and the Solitaire maybe makes sense, but the Phoenix Lords don't really make sense to me. As I think in the lore, Jane Czar actually fought right beside Yvraine, but hey, I don't make the rules, unfortunately. GW has their own designs with that. Maybe it's, too overpowered or something, who knows, but Phoenix Lords cannot, unfortunately, be included. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Ynnari in competitive play and the challenge playing them presents. So first of all, they are very rare in competitive play. A lot of you guys know this, but there's only a couple of players that actually do play them at the highest levels. They do have a very good win rate at GTs, but like I said, they're just not played that often or by many people. And I think there's two reasons for this. One, they are a very challenging army to build and play well, especially since they don't have access to much CP generation. So, a lot of players that do try them have, kind of mixed success with them, and therefore they're not really comfortable taking them to events. The other thing is that Ynnari are actually really expensive and they're a pain in the ass to build. And the reason being is because when you get into Ynnari, you have to have the kind of knowledge and background expertise in both the Eldar and the Dark Eldar to make them work. So if you're somebody like me who has played both factions and has been very comfortable with their playstyle, it's going to be fine. But if you've only ever played Dark Eldar or only ever played Eldar and you've never really looked at the other side of it, you're going to kind of struggle initially building a list and putting things together. They can also be pretty expensive money-wise if you are building them for competitive play. And the main reason for this is the Scourges. Scourges are one of the most competitive units, and you do need to buy probably at least 3 or 4 boxes of them to be able to build all the weapon options. Or you need to comb eBay for bits. A lot of players just aren't willing to do this. And of course, on top of that, you have models in the Ynnari like the Vizarch and Yvraine, which tend to be more expensive. So of course you don't need the Vizarch in your list, but he is a very good model to have. But you do need Yvraine, and she is quite an expensive HQ as well. And lastly, because of the restrictions to the Ynnari, no Phoenix Lords, no Avatar of Cain, no, homunculus units, This leaves a lot of players very mixed about it, right? If I can't field everything at my disposal, as far as, my Dark Eldar or my Eldar, then why am I going to do it, right? I want full access to all my units. I want full access to all my abilities. And the mixed nature of the Ynnari makes it very hard for players to justify swapping over from either the Eldari or Drukhari respectively, due to the fact that they don't want to lose their abilities, right? Eldar players don't want to lose Strands of Fate, and Drukhari players don't want to lose Power Through Pain. And oftentimes this is going to be the case, right? If you're playing Ynnari, yeah, you have Strands of Fate, but you lose access to Power from Pain. And your Drukhari units cannot use Strands of Fate. So, in other words, you're kind of losing a bunch of different abilities, and you're only gaining access to different units, which may or may not actually improve the consistency and the value of the army. So, because of the aforementioned reasons, Ynnari, of course, isn't that popular amongst a lot of players. However, the Ynnari are still very good, even though they are a challenge to play and put together, as long as you know what you're doing and you can kind of mix the units together in such a way so that they play off each other's strengths. And the first thing that any player that wants to play Ynnari has to understand is what Dark Eldar units work best in the army. So the reason for this is because if you just take a Ynnari army and you don't include any Dark Eldar units, you're actually just doing yourself a disservice, because you're, kind of limiting what you can take without maximizing the effectiveness of the other advantage, which is taking Dark Eldar. And there happen to be several Dark Eldar units that work beautifully with the Eldar Battle Host Detachment. And those are the following: Kabbalite Warriors, the Ravager, Scourges, Reavers, Incubi, Lilith, Drazar, Mandrakes, and of course the Beastmaster. There are other units in the Dark Eldar army, but these of course are the ones that are the best. You'll notice that there is no Archon, there is no Court of the Archon, both of the flyers are out, the Void Raven Bomber and the Razorwing Jet Fighter respectively. Not that those are bad options, but they're just not the best options in my opinion. We also have Lilith in this list, and Lilith is there because she's awesome, but there are no witches in this list, and that is simply due to the fact that they are not good without Lilith, and also they're just better in the Drukhari army. So you probably shouldn't bother with them. They're not worth taking unless you kind of plan to take them as a bodyguard unit for Lilith. So Kabbalite Warriors are a unit that is great in an Eldar army because they give sticky objectives, which is very important. They're also great anti-infantry, and they probably have one of the best combos and synergies in the entire list. And that is that they have anti-infantry weapons that can benefit from Blade Storm. It's very nasty. So you can give these guys, all the kind of heavy weapons and stuff like that. You can put them in a Venom, and every Splinter Cannon shot is going to be at AP -3 that ends up going through, which just blends Space Marines. It's just absolutely no joke. And it's especially good against tougher targets. We're going to see it be very good into things like Orcs. Even, dare I say, things like Mega Knobs might not be a bad target for this unit because of that anti-infantry 3+. Now, of course, they're still going to get the Feel No Pain and all that good stuff. So you're probably not going to kill the whole unit. But, these guys firing with Blade Storm, maybe pick up a model or two. That's not bad for the CPE cost. And lastly, they do have a good mix of special and heavy weapons. You get a blaster in there, a Dark Lance, a Splinter Cannon, of course, and a Shredder. None of those weapons are bad. They're all better than the, normal Splinter rifles that they get, which is pretty awesome as well. The Ravager is a great model in this detachment because it's very accurate. It is 115 points, which is a little bit expensive, but you get rerolls of 1 to hit versus units at their starting strength. And you also get that unparalleled mastery bonus to reroll a hit and a wound roll, which is awesome. This is a great target for Fire and Fade as well, which keeps it safe, and it's fairly cheap otherwise. You don't have to invest a lot in a Fire Prism or anything like that, because a Ravager can basically do something similar for less points. So, using this guy, coming out, shooting at something, dealing some damage, and then, either fire and fading it, or if you don't have the command points, guess what? It's not super expensive, so if you lose it, it's okay. Next up are the Scourges, and honestly, Scourges are one of the best units, not only in the Ynnari, but in the Dark Eldar Index itself, right? They're very hard hitting with their heavy weapons, taking Dark Lancers or Haywire Blasters to just absolutely obliterate hard targets. They're fast and can score secondaries with the Solarite's assault weapon, and they can also move after shooting, keeping them safe turn after turn. They are an absolutely incredible unit, and they're really good in Ynnari as well. I would say they're a little bit better in Dark Eldar still, just because of the fact that Power Through Pain allows them to reroll all their hits. They are hitting on 4s, but, this is slightly mitigated by the free reroll to hit and wound of the detachment bonus, and you can also take a guide, right? You can also have a Farseer Skyrunner in your list that can give them a good accuracy boost. Reavers are very good as well because they're cheap, they're extremely fast, and great for secondaries, especially with Fire and Fade. They reroll hit and wound rolls with the Heat Lance, which is very strong because of that detachment bonus, and they can deal mortal wounds just by moving over enemy units, as long as it's not a vehicle or monster, which does allow them to deal some significant damage when your normal units just can't do it. Very good armor save or invul from your opponent. I especially think a unit like this is going to be great into the Chaos Space Marine Codex because they have a lot of very tough, kind of models that aren't monsters or vehicles. They're, either on bikes or in Terminator armor that are going to be very hard to deal with. So being able to, on average, deal about 6 or 7 mortal wounds to a target with Fire and Fade is going to be pretty strong. Incubi are another contender, although I don't think they're quite as good now that Striking Scorpions got a significant points decrease, but they're still very good. Again, they're nowhere near the Dark Eldar version, but they are powerful Marine equivalent damage, dealers. They do get rerolls to wound out of a Falcon as well. So if you guys want to put these in a Falcon, they can come out, they can, hit pretty hard, and then they can reroll their wound rolls as well. Moving on to Lilith. Lilith is probably one of the best characters to take with the Ynnari because she has anti-infantry 2+ on her weapons, really good AP. When she joins a unit of witches, she gets an additional strength and AP. The strength really doesn't matter too much, but the AP does. She always gets fights first and gives the witches fights first and, +1 strength, +1 AP as well. And if you put her in a Falcon, she can reroll wound rolls, which honestly probably isn't that great, but you can do it if you're running her solo and, you have a unit of 5 dragons in there or something like that. You can always throw her in as well. She is an Eldari model, so she can indeed fit in a Falcon. Drazar is one of the characters that's a little bit hit or miss. I think in a Dark Eldar list, he's, kind of a little bit redundant in a lot of ways, but in an Eldari list, he's actually pretty good. Gives Incubi +1 to wound, which is great. He has precision once per game as well to quickly eliminate characters. He doesn't have Power Through Pain. He won't generate pain tokens or anything like that, but still really good to have. Mandrakes are one of those units that are basically an auto-include in Dark Eldar lists. You always see Dark Eldar players taking at least 3 units of these guys, and I think they're just as good in a Ynnari list. They have Infiltrate and basically another form of Skyleap, which makes them very good at board control and secondaries. But they also have decent shooting in combat. It's not spectacular, but these guys are a good screening unit and at the very least will deal some devastating wounds. But of course, I think the best part about these guys is the ability to infiltrate, get up the board, and if you do get first turn, you get the chance to kind of move them into combat with units that really don't want to be in combat, or, just move block things, which I think is where their real strength lies. Lastly, the Beastmaster is probably one of the best units in the Dark Eldar Index, and it is very good in Ynnari. It's very fast with Scout. The beasts move incredibly quickly. They can move through ruins just like infantry can, and they get a Scout move as well, of course. There's a lot of wounds in the Beast pack, and there's enough models in it to move, block, or tie up units in combat. So if you want to get into combat with a vehicle or transport and wrap it and surround it, on turn 1, you definitely can, and you can prevent your opponent from being able to move out of their deployment zone. So the Beast Pack is very good. And also, the Beast Pack is pretty good at dealing damage as well. It's not the greatest out there, but it can deal with, forward moving units that are maybe a little bit less tough, or just packs of 5 Space Marines and things like that. It tends to do pretty well against those targets. Okay, so now that we've kind of discussed the best Dark Eldar units to use in a Ynnari army, let's talk about the quote-unquote 2 best ways of running a Ynnari army and how to play them on the battlefield. So the first type of Ynnari army, which has had great success in tournaments, is the MSU Move, Shoot, Move Ynnari build. And then there's another kind of build that I've been working on that I also think can have a lot of success when run correctly, and that is the Melee Alpha Strike build. So the MSU Move, Shoot, Move build is characterized by a lot of minimum size units of 5, several of which can move after shooting or have other movement-based abilities. So things like Hawks, Scourges, Shadow Spectres, and Mandrakes all can do this very easily. Scourges and Shadow Spectres, respectively, are probably one of the keystone units in this type of list. And typically, this army uses an anchor unit of Wraithblades that the rest of the army can pivot around. Because again, remember, this army can't take the Avatar of Cain, so Wraithblades are the next best thing. And the Wraithblades are still good. They're very tough, even though, we've kind of moved away from that in the past couple of months. It's still a very strong unit in this type of list. And in general, the reason why this list is so effective is because it's really hard to pin down. A bunch of stuff can move, shoot, move. You have the mobility of Phantasm and Fire and Fade as well added onto that. And, it's also really hard to target because everything is either behind obscuring terrain or it's being kind of screened out by units of Mandrakes, units of Swooping Hawks, and things like that. So it's really hard to actually get into grips with the core of the list. Meaning that if your opponent wants to move things out into the open on objectives, they're basically going to be taking 12 Dark Lances or a bunch of Haywire Blasters or a bunch of, Shadow Spectre fire. And, most things are just not going to survive. And it's really hard to deal with for slower, more elite armies. Those armies that just want to kind of sit on objectives all day, this kind of army will rip them to shreds. Okay, so the next type of list I wanted to talk to you guys about was the Melee Alpha Strike. So a lot of you guys are probably shaking your heads and thinking, well, Proxy Hammer, I've never seen a Ynnari list do this edition. Yeah, sure, last edition they could do it because they got all those melee buffs. But this edition, I don't know. They don't really have many melee buffs, and it seems like a lot of the, close combat Dark Eldar units are just better in Dark Eldar. However, I actually think with the latest point decreases, it's very viable for a Ynnari list to be melee focused, and this is why. This type of list is going to utilize multiple infiltrating melee units to strike hard early and cripple or delay enemy units. Because you have access to not only Mandrakes, but striking Scorpions as well, that means potentially you can have 6 infiltrating combat units that can tie up enemy units or outright kill them on turn 1. Now, this list obviously has to have just more than that, though, to work, right? So this kind of list is going to follow up with hard-hitting melee and range units to finish tougher enemies off. Things like Skyweavers, Fire Dragons, Harlequins, Incubi, maybe even Lilith and some Witches that are going to stage after your Scorpions and Mandrakes go in. It's a very aggressive and hard-hitting list, and it has good chances of winning the game on turn 1 if it goes first. Now, of course, if it goes, second, it has much less of a chance of winning. But if you go first, chances are it's just an automatic win. If your opponent didn't counter you with infiltrating units of their own. So if you're able to set your models down first, chances are if you go first, you're just going to be able to just tie everything up in your opponent's deployment zone or very badly damage most of their units, which is awesome. It's awesome to run a list that can just do this on turn 1. And really the only thing that it probably will have trouble with is lists like the Deceptors, Chaos Space Marines, who have, cultist units who can infiltrate, and you can take 20 cultists per unit, or something ridiculous like that, right? So you can kind of spread throughout the battlefield and block the entire battlefield from being able to infiltrate or scout and stuff like that. So I think really the only weakness to this list is something like that if you don't get to deploy first. But I have to say, I have been thinking about this type of list in my head, and I've been doing a lot of theory crafting for it. And I've put together a list for you guys that I think can be very effective at playing this kind of game. So here is an example Ynnari list of my own that I've been theory crafting since the recent point changes. And, let's kind of look through it together and see if it's something that can actually work on the battlefield. All right, so this is going to be a 2,000 point Eldar Battle Host Strike Force list. For its characters, it has a Farseer Skyrunner whose goal is to maximize the damage of not only shooting units in the list, but also close combat units that are infiltrating up the board. Remember that, things like striking scorpions, if taken in large enough numbers, do really benefit from guide. Prince Riel is also in this list for some redeployment. Again, if you're using a lot of infiltrating units and you don't get first turn, you don't want to just auto lose, right? So we do have Prince Riel, who can redeploy 3 units into strategic reserve or in better positions. Remember, because of the recent FAQ that was, kind of done at the last balanced legislate, you can in fact redeploy units and also use their infiltration ability. So, you don't have to just fully retreat into your own deployment zone. You can just put them behind obscuring terrain, and they're still in a pretty good position at that point to do something on your turn 1 or, turn 2. We also have the Vizark in this list, which will be accompanying a unit of 5 Quins in a Falcon, and this is just a very hard counterpunch unit. The Vizark does insane amounts of damage to MEQ targets. He has a bunch of different abilities which help him in combat, and he also has precision. So, he's also getting the benefit of +1 wound that the Harlequins give him, and rerolls to wound out of a Falcon. So that unit is going to be extremely potent. And of course, lastly, we do have Yvraine. She is the warlord that we need to take, but she's very good. She's not attacked. She does a bunch of anti-infantry damage, devastating wounds as well, just absolutely clears infantry of all types. And she's going to be in a huge Quinn unit as well in a Wave Serpent. So that unit is going to be very hard hitting also, and is going to be part of the second wave. For our dedicated transports, we do have a Wave Serpent with a Bright Lance, although we do have 2 Venoms later in the list that are dedicated transports as well. As for the other data sheets, we have that Falcon that I spoke of earlier to transport the Vizark and some Quins. We have 2 Skyweavers with Skyweaver Haywire Cannons and Star Bolas. I chose to go with the Star Bolas this time just for a little extra shooting. I figured since most of the army is melee anyway, having a little bit of close range shooting with, strength 7 couldn't hurt. And I think it's AP -2, so it's pretty good at taking out Marines, and it's decent at, taking out some damage on some lighter vehicles or monsters. We also have those 2 troops I was talking about, the big troop with Yvraine, with 11 players in it, with, the 4 fusion pistols and 4 neurodisruptors, and we have the smaller troop as well. Now, a lot of you guys might be thinking, why am I taking the neurodisruptors? Aren't the shuriken pistols just better? Well, personally, I know they're, no AP and stuff like that, but I do think they're just better because they're just more consistent, right? You're going against infantry most of the time, and that just means you're going to deal more wounds. So especially to tougher infantry like Custodes or Orcs, which are going to be huge in the meta. I mean, you guys already know, Orcs are just swarming all over the meta right now, just absolutely wrecking tournaments and things like that. So I think the neurodisruptors going forward are going to be the slightly better pick. We have 2 units of striking scorpions in this list. Now, I could have gone with 3 units of 3, but instead I chose to go with 1 unit of 10 and 1 unit of 5. And excuse me, I think I said 3 units of 3. I meant 3 units of 5. But, I chose to go with the bigger unit because I want the opportunity, if I do get first turn, to completely eliminate something by, throwing guide on it with the Farseer Skyrunner and just having them, run in and just wreck face. Also, having a unit of 10 makes it a little bit easier to make charges against farther targets turn 1 with a fate dice. So, if I want to reach a target that's a little bit deeper in the deployment zone, I can always use a fate dice for it and automatically get them in. But yeah, these guys are going to be the first wave. They're very effective against infantry, so will definitely do a lot of damage to whatever they hit. Or if your opponent doesn't really have a lot of infantry in the list, the least I think they can do is tie them up in close combat. If there's a lot of vehicles in their list, for example, they can at least charge in, tie them up, and prevent them from moving. For the Dark Eldar units in our list, we have a Beastmaster, which is extremely good as well. Scouts 9 up the battlefield, so you can use Scout 9, move up. Then, of course, they move 12 inches. You can move 12 more inches on top of that and then charge into something. They don't have Strands of Fate, but they don't really need it. They're beasts. They can easily move through ruins just like infantry can. So they are extremely effective in that way. And they also easily have enough models in the unit to be able to fully wrap a Land Raider. So if your opponent is running, 2 or maybe even sometimes 3 Land Raiders, being able to wrap up one of those things and prevent them from moving is a huge benefit. We, of course, also have a unit of Coprolite Warriors for sticky objectives and to, utilize that great Blade Storm stratagem for their anti-infantry weapons, which is very good against, Marine equivalent armies. Basically, targeting a Venom with Blade Storm with these guys in it will guarantee that you wipe 5 Marines in a single shooting phase. We also have 3 units of Mandrakes in this list. We have 2 units of Mandrakes mostly for screening purposes, but of course, in certain circumstances, they will be joining the first wave. And we have a unit of 10. Now, the unit of 10 is not meant to deal damage. It's meant to spread out as far as possible in deployment. When you deploy your first unit, you're going to deploy this full unit of 10 typically. Spread them out as far as they can across the battlefield so you can deny infiltration room to your opponent. And that way, the rest of your infiltrators and your scouting units can get better positions on the battlefield. We also have 2 units of Reavers in this list, and they're very good because they have the Heat Lances, so, they will be part of the second wave. Move forward, stage. If your opponent does manage to move out some vehicles, you can, kind of go forward, pop those vehicles, and then perhaps even score some secondaries, score things like deploy teleport homers, or maybe even behind enemy lines because they're so fast. Rounding out the list, we have 2 Venoms, and these are just going to carry the Coprolite Warriors, pure and simple. They're just there for that. So, sticky objectives and Blade Storm, and that's it. All right, so I thought I would go ahead and also include this diagram of the general battle plan that this army will follow. So the Striking Scorpions and Mandrakes will be out front, infiltrating up the battlefield, as you can see here, of that huge unit of 10 Mandrakes in the center of the battlefield in purple. They're going to be spread out. We also have 2 units of 5 Mandrakes spread out on the sides. And of course, this will largely depend on where your opponent deploys, where these go. But in general, that's what you're going to do to make sure that, they can't use scout moves. They can't also use infiltrators near your army. And then you're going to deploy your Striking Scorpion units behind some terrain, but kind of close enough to where they could get a first turn charge on enemy units. So the first turn comes along, and let's say you go first. You're going to move all of your Striking Scorpions and Mandrake units into combat with enemy units, and you're really going to try to engage as much as possible to tie up as much as you can. As a result, that's going to give you leeway to be able to move up the rest of your army behind ruins and stage for the next turn. Because when your opponent, does eventually, kind of kill your Mandrakes or Scorpions, they're going to try to move forward as quickly as possible to claim objectives. And at that point, your army is going to be able to kind of clean up the weakened units that, your Scorpions and Mandrakes had been engaged with the turn before. So Skyweavers, Reavers, your Falcon with the Vizark, and also the Wave Serpent with Yvrain in it can move forward behind those ruins and just be in a good position to charge and wipe out whatever they hit. Meanwhile, remember we do have Prince Riel, so that unit of beasts that's set up in the back there, we're just setting that up as kind of a bait so that your opponent doesn't expect it, but we're actually going to deploy that unit at the edge of our deployment zone. Afterwards, they're going to scout forward, and they're also going to be part of wave number 1. And then, of course, the Farseer Skyrunner will be somewhere to, throw guide on a unit of Mandrakes, perhaps, or even the unit of Scorpions that's going to go into charge as well. So, this is kind of the general battle plan. Of course, I don't know how it's going to perform in an actual game. I've actually not played it yet, but I'm really excited to try this out in a game because I think it could be really good. Just in general, the hard-hitting nature of this list, I think, is going to be something that is going to be kind of hard for a lot of opponents to deal with. And because of the fact that they're not going to be allowed to move where they want to, is going to make their game plan really hard to execute. So I'm hoping that's the case. I'm hoping this isn't just, like a fever dream where I'm thinking it's going to be really good on the battlefield, but then it's just not. So we're just going to have to wait and see. I think one of the things this list does probably lack is a primary objective unit like Wraithblades. That may be something that I consider down the road. I didn't really want to put them in the list, and I probably won't because that's not really the theme that I'm trying to go for. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section about, this battle plan in general. I know that it really hinges on getting first turn, but, assuming it gets first turn, how do you guys think it'll play out? All right, so what are my final thoughts on the list and possible improvements? Well, I haven't played it yet, but I'm thinking ahead, and if I find that I need more anti-large in the list, I might actually drop a Reaver, a Scorpion, and a Mandrake to put in 2 units of Fire Dragons. I can keep those Fire Dragons in reserve or rapid ingress them later, and they can deal some good damage to, monsters or vehicles, basically whatever I need them to. I might also swap the Vizark and the Quins for Lilith and Witches, depending on how well the Vizark and Quins perform. So, Vizark and Quins, I think they're actually one of the best units as far as a melee unit for the points. But, Lilith and Witches are around that cost, and you can actually split them up. Because I have the Venom in the list, I can kind of split them up accordingly. I could just have the Coblite Warriors just, on foot or something like that. And I can always put the 5 Witches in a Venom, and then I can put 5 more Witches with Lilith in the Falcon, which is also very effective. Lilith and the Vizark are both characters that deal a ton of damage. Lilith is more of a glass cannon, while the Vizark can take a few more hits, but both are very good, no doubt. So in conclusion, I think Ynnari are still looking pretty great. Even post-point changes, and with the changes in the meta as well, I feel that Combat Ynnari actually has a lot of potential. Again, haven't tried it yet, but I do want to get a few reps in with it this week. And while they do take a lot of practice to get the hang of, I think Ynnari are a very competitively rewarding faction and a very cool army to field, if you have the patience to hunt those extra Dark Lances or Haywire Blasters on eBay. Because I think each box comes with 2, so if you buy 4 boxes of them, you should have enough. But, again, correct me if I'm wrong in the comment sections. It's been quite a while since I bought a box of Scourges. It was actually since 6th edition, if you can believe that. So, I forgot exactly how many of them are in there. But I think if you buy 4 boxes of Scourges, you should have enough heavy weapons for both the Haywire Blasters and Dark Lances. So yeah, for those of you out there thinking of starting Ynnari, I definitely recommend it. They are a very cool army to play, and they're very rewarding as well. I'm actually going to be doing a video later this week on the best ways to start the Ynnari. So for those of you guys looking for a quick in, so to speak, stay tuned for that video. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and thank you so much to all my Patreons and supporters for supporting the channel over the last 1.5 years. Your help has greatly improved the channel and helped it grow significantly. If you do want to join the Patreon and help support the channel, I have free trials activated, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who like talking about strategies, tactics, and of course hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description below. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon or some Eldar-inspired apparel on the channel store page to rep your local game store, I will leave the links for those in the description also. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.